I'm Anthony Love.
And I'm Marley Love. Come along with us on
Traveling While Black.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Traveling While Black. I'm Marley.
And I'm Anthony. Today, we're diving into an important and inspiring journey through America's historic Black districts, where we will explain what they are and how they came about.
We'll also show you an example of how to experience those neighborhoods today. So, take a look.
In cities throughout America, in certain neighborhoods, you might find the remnants of an interesting time in our country's history. A time when the color of your skin dictated where you could live.
And while in some cities you have to look harder than others for artifacts of those times, the fact of the matter is that most cities at one point in their existence enforced racist redlining practices that forced Black communities into segregated areas.
But even under these oppressive conditions, these neighborhoods turned into thriving centers for Black business and culture, and would result in what would become known as historic Black districts and neighborhoods.
These districts buzz with life, becoming the heart of Black culture in their cities, home to jazz clubs, Black-owned businesses, and other important cultural institutions. Within these areas, community was not only built, but also strengthened.
In every city without fail, that strength would be needed, as every one of these historic neighborhoods would face the same cycle of decline due to lack of investment, increasing crime, and displacement of long-term residents.
But in recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest and investment in these historic districts. Efforts to revitalize and honor the Black heritage are ongoing.
It wasn't until we moved to Seattle and learned about the city's historic Black Central District that we were introduced to the concept of historic Black districts. But since then, we have had the pleasure of experiencing others across the country.
On this episode, we'll be showing you a few of those neighborhoods, all of which you can experience today.
3 dope places, all that will hopefully give you more insight on historic Black districts across America. As we mentioned before, it was our move to Seattle that introduced us to the concept of historic Black districts. Actually, it's Seattle's historic Black Central District is where we're at today.
And in between segments during this episode, we'll be popping up at different landmarks around this historic Black district, sort of giving you a mini tour of the CD.
But for now, let us take you a couple hours south of Seattle and introduce you to another Pacific Northwest historic Black district. Take a look. Most are familiar with the state of Oregon's past in relationship to Black people. It is because of that history, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that the state still has a rich Black history.
Dating all the way back to its inception as a territory, Black people have always been a part of the state's history, from pioneers to state representatives.
Yet, of the state's long-standing Black history, perhaps it's no surprise that it is the city of Portland that holds some of the most dynamic parts of that history. A history that today might be hard to see, but if you wanted to try and experience it, then you at least need to know where to look.
In the northeastern part of the city is what is known as the Albina District, an area that encompasses several neighborhoods including Elliott, King, and Boise. The district is known as the historic center of Portland's Black history.
Ironically, it was the city's racist housing practices that led to Albina becoming the center of Black culture in Portland. As a result, the district has been host to some of the most prominent moments in Portland Black history, from vibrant, colorful ones to more darker but pivotal ones.
Albina's Black history jump-started in the 1940s during World War II, when a large influx of AfricanAmerican workers relocated to Portland for jobs in the booming industries being driven by the war.
Around 150,000 Black laborers added to a Black population of Portland that prior to the war was estimated to be less than 3,000. In order to accommodate the influx, another city had to be created, so to provide more housing.
That city was the city of Vanport, a housing development that housed many of the Black workers, but the little relief provided by the manufactured city did not last long. When the Vanport flood in 1948 destroyed the community, many African Americans relocated to the Albina area.
By 1958, 73% of the Black population in Portland was located in Albina. And because of that, the Albina District became the center of Portland's Black community.
The wages provided by the booming war industries allowed for Black residents to buy nicer homes within the neighborhoods. And with that, Black businesses began popping up. The famed Mississippi Avenue was a commercial hub for the Black community, featuring many of the African-American owned businesses.
Albina also became the hub for one of the city's most impactful cultural music movements, the Albina music movement. Beginning in the 1960s, the Albina music movement was a period marked by a flourishing of Black music in the Albina District.
Clubs and venues became significant cultural hubs, showcasing a variety of music genres, including jazz, blues, soul, and funk. Throughout and until the end of the period in the 1980s, the movement played an important role in the cultural and social life of the neighborhood.
It was no coincidence that the end of the movement correlated with the compounding of the negative impacts of the city's discriminatory practices. Being that it was nearly impossible for Black homeowners in the community to secure home improvement loans, as well as a lack of other outside investments, the Albina District started to experience economic decline.
Although increasing unemployment and poverty rates weren't the only contributing factors to the decline of the historic district, urban renewal projects were also a huge contributor. Beginning in the 1960s, federal legislation encouraged cities to redevelop so-called blighted areas.
The problem was that these so-called blighted areas were almost always historically Black neighborhoods, and Portland was no different. For example, in central Albina, hundreds of homes were razed to make way for the Memorial Coliseum and then Interstate 5.
Just between 1960 and 1970, Albina's Elliott neighborhood alone lost half of its residents to involuntary displacement. As the gentrification continued throughout the 1980s, 90s, and into the 2000s, so did the decline of Portland's Black population.
But just like during the high times, the Albina District has always been at the center of the fight against racism and discrimination during the lows. From being a hub of the civil rights movement, including the Portland chapter of the Black Panther Party, to being the location of the house that represents the last vestige against gentrification.
In fact, it was a proposed commercial development plan within Albina in 2013 that made the city of Portland reconsider its historic approach to development. Thanks to Black residents' pushback, additional investments were made to account for affordable housing, but also include the community input in development decisions.
Even with the conscious considerations, the Albina District is a far cry from what it once looked like when the Portland Black community once thrived.
Wow. The Albina District was definitely one of those historic Black districts we had never heard of prior to moving to the Pacific Northwest. But who knew the neighborhood had such a huge contribution to pop culture?
Still and yet, Albina definitely wasn't the only one. And after the break, we're gonna show you a few more. So don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. The building behind me is the Liberty Bank building in Seattle. It is the first Black-owned bank in the Pacific Northwest. The building today offers affordable housing as well as shops and restaurants, many of which are Black-owned. And because of Liberty Bank, Central District was established as a Black financial hub in Seattle, similar to 18th and Vine District in Kansas City, Missouri. Take a look.
The story of Kansas City's contributions to American culture begins and still lives within the city's 18th and Vine District,
which began like most historic Black neighborhoods during the earlier years of the city's development, the only area where Black families were allowed to live.
Unfortunately, back in those days, early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, African Americans were only confined to a certain few blocks there in the 18th and Vine area. But that's where a lot of Black businesses were housed. The barbershop, the grocery stores, the hotels, all their shops was all in that area.
Among the collection of businesses sprouting up within the 18th and Vine District were 3 Black-owned barbecue joints.
You have over 128 barbecue restaurants in Kansas City. In 1946, you had 3 Black barbecue restaurants. 2024, you still have 3. Now the same 3.
The barbecue that came from these particular establishments would not only define KC's style, but also create mainstream viability in what was once considered a lower class pastime.
Barbecue wasn't seen as something that people really thought was a viable or respectable career. But because it originated there, And now, nearly 75 years later, when you talk about barbecue or so, it's not just because it's coming out of a brown bag, it's a sit-down fancy restaurant.
The delicious barbecue wasn't the only thing attracting people to the district. Because of the overlooking of enforcing a particular federal law, the city became a really hot attraction, especially for a particular type of crowd.
There were over 300 jazz clubs in this town. Many people migrated to Kansas City that were playing blues and jazz in the South. And one of the things that happened was in Kansas City during those times, prohibition really wasn't a thing because you could come here and drink. And so jazz began to flourish because there was more places for people to play. Heard it's been said that jazz was born in New Orleans, but it grew up in Kansas City. Charlie Parker was one of the essential people that really began the evolution of jazz from a place where jazz used to dance to it, like Ellington and Louis Armstrong. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, those guys were the cats that really kind of moved it to the next level, and that happened right here in Kansas City.
This had an amazing effect on the neighborhood, more ways than just a financial influx.
We're trying to put a police statue that is still 86th Street and symbolizes that area. You know, with the suits and the chain and the big hat, because that was what we hear, but we were hearing color issues.
The national and cultural contributions from 18th and Vine District didn't stop at jazz and barbecue. Yes, it extended into the sports world and even beyond that.
But when we look at Kansas City, it's the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. The leagues were formed here in Kansas City at a meeting held at the old Paseo YMCA. The Negro Leagues were where Jackie Robinson got his start. Jackie Robinson's breaking of the color barrier would not only change the game, it changed this country. It was in essence the start of the civil rights movement in this country.
Yes, we were blown away. Somehow, it wasn't until now that we grasped the full impact of Kansas City's Black culture specific to the 18th and Vine District.
Look, with us originally being from St. Louis, Missouri, you can trust me when I say that we definitely missed the Midwest barbecue. But speaking of food, Mars and I are gonna run into Fast Chicken and Waffles, a Black-owned restaurant right here in Seattle Central District, to grab a quick bite to eat. But when we return, we're gonna show you some more historic Black districts. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're at the Northwest African-American Museum, a museum dedicated to African-American art, history, and culture in the Pacific Northwest. Hey Mars, perhaps one day we might have our own exhibit in there.
Hey, only time will tell. But now we want to show you one of the earliest Black districts west of the Mississippi that we knew nothing about until we embarked on our first TWB Across America Road Trip Series, 5 Points District.
Throughout this series, you will see how all of the Rocky Mountain state cities were influenced by the railroad industry, and in some cases, the main reason they came to be.
No surprise that the industry had a major influence on one of the oldest districts in the city, even designating the name of the district.
To go back historically, Denver was founded at the confluence of Cherry Creek and Platte River in 1858 and grew in a northeasterly direction. Later on, someone started other parts of the city like Capitol Hill on the northeast west-south grid. And as Capitol Hill grew north and the 5 Points neighborhood continued to grow northeast, you get these weird corners. Some spaces you'll count 5 corners. And in the 1890s, a trolley rolled down Welton Street and stopped at that corner. Instead of calling the names of all the streets on the marquee, they called it 5 Points, and the name stuck. Now, it's called the 5 Points Historic Cultural District. It's been registered as a cultural district.
The industry was even one of the two main influences on the 5 Points in becoming the historic Black district in Denver.
It's always been a multi-ethnic neighborhood, and we had a lot of Black families move into that area, especially with the influx of folks coming to work on the railroads.
The other major influence on the 5 Points becoming the historic Black district in the city was the usual suspect behind historic Black neighborhoods across America, redlining.
But also, as usual to the story of historical Black neighborhoods in America, the Black residents built a thriving community that became a national cultural hotspot.
In the midst of all of that, we had quite a few Black business owners up and down Welton Street. A range of different businesses, from clothing and groceries and dry cleaners, and anything imaginable that you needed was along that street.
Yes, black faces made up all aspects of the neighborhood, including the fire department that was located within the neighborhood.
Right behind me is historic Denver Station number 3. It's in a predominantly black neighborhood known as 5 Points in the Denver area. It is known as the Eye of the Storm. Eye of the Storm comes from this neighborhood. It's always being a safe haven and a place to go for the neighbors and the community to come together and feel safe, a part of the community, and a place that they'd be able to go to for whatever they need. It's become a huge part of this community, this neighborhood, and as well as how long this station's been here. It's one of the oldest fire stations in Denver. The original Station 3 is just across the street, but this is one of the longest running fire stations in the city of Denver, and it means a lot to the neighborhood.
While the local black residents ran the district's infrastructure, the district also attracted outside black visitors thanks to a same American art form that attracted people to Kansas City's 18th and Vine, jazz.
Thanks to the efforts of a local musician, a lot of popular jazz musicians and other celebrities were driven to the neighborhood, helping it become known as Harlem of the West.
George Morrison, who was a classically trained concert violinist, wasn't allowed to play in the symphony orchestras. So he started his own band and they traveled around the United States performing. And he knew all of these musicians like Duke Ellington, Lionel Hampton, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald. And they started having guests come in, some of the nightclubs. And it got to the place where we were having so many guests come in, we were called Harlem of the West. This was just a place to come in.
Unfortunately, as the case with almost all historic black neighborhoods across America, the good times eventually slowed down and opportunity began to dry up within the 5 Points.
Ironically, in some ways, the same factors that contributed to the neighborhood becoming what it was in its prime also contributed to its decline. Redlining, black mobility, and a railroad, or at least a newer version of one.
Redlining continued to limit resources and investments into the community, and the advancement in salaries allowed more and more black residents to move to more desired places and areas outside the district.
The final straw would be the construction of the light rail, which disrupted a lot of the remaining businesses while it was being built. All of this resulted to the city council declaring the neighborhood to be blighted in 2012.
While there is still an ongoing struggle with gentrification and in some cases redlining, there are current vibrant black businesses and motivated individuals determined on preserving this neighborhood's character and heritage.
It's important to me that we preserve this history because there's so much information about what was experienced in that neighborhood. Music and entertainment and great restaurants and small business owners, community gatherings, just a lot of things happening. We don't want to lose that history.
The neighborhood also hosts two of the biggest annual events within the city, the Juneteenth Music Festival and the 5 Points Jazz Festival.
Once again on our journey, we encountered a rich, impactful story of our history that we previously were not aware of.
But lucky for us, once again on our journey, we were able to experience that history up close, as well as the people carrying it on today, both via artifacts from the past and through the living establishments paving the way into the future.
Wow, the Harlem of the West. While the 5 Points District isn't known for that today, you can still experience that rich history and more within the district.
Yep, and that is also the case for the other districts we spoke about in this episode. In fact, let us show you how you can experience Kansas City's 18th and Vine district today.
As we stated several times already, we've been to Kansas City a bunch of times throughout our life, but this time, really grasping the black history is probably why we spent a lot of time on 18th and Vine experiencing that history.
No surprise, we dropped into the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, the popular museum dedicated to preserving and celebrating the history of African American baseball.
Kansas City is the proper place and the rightful place for a museum dedicated to this subject matter to be, because it is literally in the same neighborhood that the leagues were formed. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum opened in a little tiny one-room office here at historic 18th and Vine across the street from where we currently operate now inside the historic Lincoln Building. The office couldn't have been very much larger than the immediate space that we're standing in. It had a conference room table, and guys like my dear friend, the late great Buck O'Neill, and other local Negro Leaguers literally took turns paying the monthly rent to keep that little office open, and with it, our hopes and dreams of one day building a facility that would pay rightful tribute to not just one of the greatest chapters in baseball history, but what now thousands of people each and every year discover, one of the greatest chapters in American history.
Experiencing this museum was amazing. Walking through the exhibits, you could almost feel the spirit of the old players, owners, umps, and others who are a part of the Negro League's rich history.
We definitely recommend everyone visiting this museum at least once in their lifetime, especially in the near future because the museum has some big plans in the works.
So last May, we announced plans to build a brand new, standalone Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, an exciting 30,000+ square foot facility that will be built adjacent to the former Paseo YMCA, soon to become the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center, and creating what I call the nation's first Negro Leagues campus as the gateway into historic 18th and Vine, and creating an international headquarters for both Black baseball and social history. So that's a long way from that little one-room office.
We will definitely be back for that. Our experience with dope museums didn't stop with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Just across the way was another museum commemorating another historic contribution from the city, the American Jazz Museum.
The American Jazz Museum is another amazing museum that allows visitors to experience jazz through a variety of interactive exhibits, films, and artifacts, some of which we couldn't believe.
Charlie Parker, this is his saxophone behind me.
Yes, this is another museum that we absolutely recommend folks experiencing at least once in their lifetime. You will definitely learn something new about America's only indigenous art form. I mean, even the people running the museum have some legendary musical moments under their belt.
The museum experience was great, but we need to experience something just as fun, but a little less educational.
And what better way to achieve that goal than to drink some beer?
For us, beer is normally not our first option, but when we heard that one of the most popular brewery and tap rooms within the city was Black-owned, we knew we had to check it out.
Vine Street Brewery, Missouri's first Black-owned brewery. Even though it was closed on the day of our visit, we still had the opportunity to meet with co-founder Commit Coleman, who gave us a tour and explained to us the inspiration and story behind the barely year-old brew brand.
Tail end of 2021, we first announced that we were opening this brewery. Had a pretty huge impact here in Kansas City, at least. Kansas City had never had a Black-owned brewery before, and I don't think people really even thought about that as a concept. The location question came into place, and so Kansas City has lots of great locations, but there's only one location that really resonates with us as Black creatives and Black innovators and community catalysts, and that's 18th and Vine. When we opened June 30th of 2023, we were able to really get a bunch of the community out. It was immediately the most diverse tap room in Kansas City, probably in the country, to be honest with you. You never see, Black people just completely mixed with white people, Hispanic people, like all different walks of life, the whole spectrum, straight, queer, all of that. So we really appreciated that.
And of course, we had to have some of the beer.
Listen, this beer was delicious. Look, I am far from a beer drinker, but I can see myself drinking beer from Vine Street Brewery, which makes sense because according to Kimmett, Vine Street thrives to make a beer for everyone. So be sure to follow Vine Street Brewery's social media and check their website for hours and information and any special events happening at their tap room.
After watching our experience at the Jazz Museum in Kansas City, it's fitting that we are now standing in Jimi Hendrix Park, a park named after the famous rocker that's actually from the Central District.
We loved our experience on 18th and Vine, as well as Albina and 5 Points. And remember that you can see all of our full experiences at our YouTube channel.
Definitely, but we really hope that you take the opportunity to experience those and any other historic Black districts around the country. But now it's time for the part of the show where we see where some of you are traveling while Black.
Our pictures this episode come from Brianna on Route 66 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mars, I think it's time for our road trip on Route 66.
I agree. And we also have Donzel and Corazelle, Belize. Belize is one of our favorite countries to visit.
Yeah, it is. And that's it for this episode's Where Are You Traveling While Black?
And be sure to send in your pictures as well.
Wow, those were some great photos. And thank you to everyone who sent some in. And be sure to send yours in too by submitting on our website at travelingwhileblackseattle.com.
Well, that's our episode for today. As we've seen, The history of America's Black historic districts is a testament to the resilience and creativity of our Black community. So it's crucial that we keep these stories alive and continue to celebrate the rich cultures that these neighborhoods represent.
So we encourage all of you to visit, support, and learn more about these districts, whether it's a museum visit, a walking tour, or even supporting a local Black-owned business still operating within. It all goes a long way. And one final note, on top of all of that, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Traveling While Black, and be sure to follow us on our other social platforms, Instagram at TravelWhileBLK and TikTok at TravelingWhileBLK.
Yep, definitely follow and subscribe. But other than that, until next time, beautiful people, stay up, stay true, and do you.